Hello everyone. Welcome to... Wait, I will remember the title of this. Why many people say they need to see the mechanic first before they can learn it, and why they're wrong, probably. By me. I will have a thing up. I thought that I had opened, but I had closed it. Alright. And then if I... Look at that! Here we are. So... General idea about this panel. Right. This phrase, or some variation of, I need to see the mechanic before I can learn it, is the most common thing I've heard from raiders. It's just... And I've been in quite a few different raid groups. I've been in casual groups that raided 4 hours, 6 hours a week. I've also done week 1 groups that would raid 8 or more hours a week, or a day, for like the first week. And this is just a phrase that I have heard many times. This is just probably not true. Sometimes you'll hear things about visual learners, people who learn by doing, or other learning styles, that like kinetic, auditory, etc. The idea of learning styles and that concept is basically fake. There's a Veritasium video on this subject called Why Learning Styles Are a Myth or something of that nature. It's about 60 minutes long. If you're curious about it, you can pull it up after this presentation and watch it. It's pretty interesting. But in general, the synopsis of the video is the most effective learning method is through multiple methods. This is known as multimodal or a multimedia effect. So, before I get into that, who am I? I'm Seirin, Hironaya. I raided since Eden's Promise, which was the last tier of Shadowbringers. Not Shadowbringers. Yes, Shadowbringers. So that started with Cloud of Darkness and then went all the way up to Eden. I've been in a bunch of different groups like I mentioned before, both casual and hardcore. And that's about it for me. So, why is any of this stuff relevant for you? Well, if you're a world first raider and you're watching this right now, it's probably not very relevant for you at all, because there aren't any resources available for you, and you're just going to primarily learn by doing because that's all you have available for you. But if you're not a world first raider, and I appreciate you for watching if you are, this is relevant. Both in a static and in PF setting. Because studying, regardless if you're in a static or a PF, or you're a PF warrior, is important. This also spans whatever kind of core your group is, whether it's hardcore or casual or anything in between. You and your group, conversely, are going to benefit from studying. And this will lead to better and more meaningful prog. Because by avoiding dying repeatedly to the same mechanics and needing to, say, like, discuss and relearn how something is working and why you've done it wrong, this leads to more prog time, this leads to you progressing through mechanics quicker, and progging is fun. Improving as a player is fun, and progging is fun. And at least personally for me, I think progging is perhaps the most fun the game has to offer when it comes to raid, whether this be blind progging or just normal prog. I'm not a super high optimization type player. I don't go and try to go for like the top 1%. I don't find the scoreboard or parse runs very interesting for me. Like, I do optimize within the realm of safety, but I don't find optimizing those very minute cases to be very fun for me. So for me, I just like to prog and learn things and do them and then get better at that. And hopefully you have similar ideas about prog being fun. And if you improve your prog experience, that means it's more fun for you and for the people around you, because at the end of the day, raiding isn't really a solo activity. You're not just raiding and you're just like doing your own thing. You've got to raid with 7 other people, whether that be in a static or whether that be random people on Party Finder. And generally, progging better is going to be a better experience for everyone involved, which is great. So I think you do yourself a disservice in general by assuming you won't understand a mechanic until you do it. And by setting yourself up for failure, you in turn end up with a lower level prog experience. And that's why I think it's important to study with intent of success. So this mindset of, I see this mechanic, I don't really understand it, I'll just figure it out when I go in an instance, is kind of setting you up for failure. And I think we should review that and try to see what we can do to address that problem. So, how do we use the content that is available for us to basically improve our experience to prog? We're going to ignore learning by doing, because you're going to learn by doing, right? So you study to raid, and then you raid you do. So you will do some non-zero amount of learning by doing. But there are 3, I would say, main sources of content that is available for you to learn from. I'll just list them here. The first one would be visual guides, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail in a second. Oops. Whoa! Visual guides. Next would be written guides, or diagrams in some cases, but kind of wrap them all up in the same thing. And finally, there are clear VODs. So visual guides are probably what most people are familiar with. These include creators such as Hector, Junebob, who has a panel this weekend, I think on Sunday. You should go to that. And Renon. They offer varying levels and content as far as their visual guides go. But these are YouTube creators. Hector, for example, is primarily just diagrams and auditory guide content. So he'll have created a diagram, he'll show it in motion, but he'll also have a voiceover describing mechanics. Junebob is kind of the opposite in some ways. Junebob does diagrams and also shows VOD clips of the mechanic, but there's no auditory information. It's just the visuals, there's text on screen that you have to read yourself, but there isn't like a voiceover. And then Renon, for example, does a little bit of everything. Sometimes you'll see the VODs of the mechanics, you'll see the diagrams, and Renon also does a voiceover and speaks over the mechanics and tries to explain them. So visual guides are great because they do often cover various different modes of learning. And ultimately, reading is a bit of everything. There's some like visual stuff, there's auditory cues, there's just like pattern recognition. So the more you can take in information in different ways, the better it'll be for you. There are also written guides. The balance might have some. There are raid diagrams, such as the raid plan.io, toolbox, etc. Those kind of things, or just like paste bins, images. I generally consider those written guides, they're not like moving parts or anything. They're just like, here's this thing, maybe there's a diagram, but there's also often text on the side explaining what the mechanic is, because it's not a video and you can't do voiceover. And there's also online docs. This is very true, especially of like the first week of a raid, while groups are following raid week 1, or world first groups rather. There'll usually be a like Google Docs posted where people are detailing out mechanics and what they're doing, and these are also useful and interesting to read through, especially early on a tier. And finally are clear VODs. I don't know how many people generally study off clear VODs, but they're great, and I will get into them later. And I don't know if many people consider them study material, but I think they're very, very useful. Ultimately, though, the idea here is that active engagement in your study material is the most important thing. The thing you don't want to do, and the thing that I feel happens, is that, okay, you have raid coming up this week. You put up the Hector video that you're doing M3S. You put up the M3S Hector video, you hit play, you watch it, you end it. It's, I don't know, 16 minutes long or whatever, however long that M3S video is. And then you say, all right, I've studied. Anything else that I need to know, I will figure it out in an instant. Don't do this. This is not really the best way to study. So don't just end up with saying, I won't understand it until I get to it, because, again, this is the idea of setting yourself up for failure, where you really want to be setting yourself up for success here. And the things I'm going to touch on a little bit are things that, like, you probably vaguely remember in, like, elementary school or high school, where your teachers might have said something like studying is a skill. And that's because it is a skill, and being able to study effectively takes effort and focus. So if you're, for example, using VODs, or not VODs, using visual guides, at the bare minimum, take some time to stop and pause the video. So if there's a mechanic where Hector has a diagram up, and it's showing, like, maybe there's 2 different patterns to this mechanic, and it goes by in 30 seconds because he has to cover the whole mechanic, the whole fight goes by in like 30 seconds, a minute. That's not necessarily enough time for you as a viewer to engage with that material. So take some time to pause it, look at the diagram, see the different patterns, listen to his words, rewind it, and try to understand why the positioning for the players for this particular mechanic is the way it is. Second, you can write notes. This is another way of engaging with the material. You can have the, like, even if he's explaining it, Hector is explaining it, and you're seeing it visually, just write some quick notes down. Maybe they're just for your role. Maybe you don't need to write rules, all the notes for how the whole mechanic works. For example, in trying to think of an M1S, right? Quadruple swipe. Either your support or your DPS, depending on which role you are, you don't need to remember necessarily how to do or where you need to be for each role for that. So if you're a DPS, you're just away from the boss at whatever's your determined party fighter strat of the safe spot. Maybe you're doing same spots on cardinals. So you stay at your enter card, max melee if you're melee, and you wait. And you just jot this down very quickly and say, okay, max melee first, then bait, and then back to enter card for safety. It might be just like max melee. You just jot this down. 1, 2, bait, cardinals. 3, safe on cardinals. Oops. And then technically there's a 4th hit, so A, right? That's it. It doesn't have to be super involved. It's just reinforcement for what you're already doing. And finally, the last kind of way to engage with some of these things might seem a little like doubling on what's already there, but draw yourself a diagram. There's no harm in, even if there is a diagram being shown, to draw the diagram again. So like say you're learning M4S and you're doing ion cannon, right? The diagram doesn't have to be good. You can just open up MS Paint, do this in MS Paint or whatever. And here's your arena. Your little purple thing here. Say you're the support for this case. We know that there are 4 debuffs involved. There's this little circle, this big circle. Technically there's 5, I guess. Then there's like a red circle. And then there's a pair of arrows. One is arrows pointing out that are like kind of green with people, and then there are blue arrows pointing in. You can draw little people too if you really want to. Look something like this, but you don't have to. And drawing the debuffs is important. I encourage you to draw the debuffs in a simplified version because a lot of Final Fantasy raiding is identifying debuffs and being able to quickly read your debuff and know what to do with that debuff. So being able to drawing it out, even if it's not precisely exactly what the debuff is, but just getting the general idea of what that debuff looks like and putting in your head assist in this connection that you're trying to make here. So if you have the small circle or the big circle, which are like, there are names to these things that I don't think anyone knows. They're like conductor, conducive conductor, spinning conductor, and then there's like proximate current, which are the arrows. Proximate current is the close arrow, and then there's something else current, which is the far arrow. You don't have to know those words, but it's sometimes easier to refer to them, but no one will know what you're talking about. So draw these out and then just think to yourself, okay, well, if I get each thing, where do I go? Well, if I have the red dot, I know I'm in due center. If I get the arrows, I know I'm slightly above center. And then if I get the other two, the small circle or the big circle, assuming I'm support, I go kinda to the left and to the front. That's all you really have to do. It doesn't have to be a very precise diagram. You don't have to make this diagram something that you can share online. You don't have to save every step along the way. You just tell yourself, draw it out quickly, sketch it out, draw some diagrams, and try to move the pieces along like as if you're playing on with physical board pieces. And there's another thing to this with the colors. Technically, you're supposed to have like you're either a positron debuff or you're a negatron debuff, and then you go to the opposite. But yeah, just draw these things. The final useful thing for just quick studying, these are quick studying methods, is, well, not the final thing. But one penultimate. Practice callouts. You don't have to be the shot caller in your group. You don't have to be the actual person doing callouts. But, for example, I'm going to pull up... I'm going to search up the first M1S clear VOD I can find, which I believe was Whoopsis. M1S clear VOD. And then I'm going to, once I am able to show it, because I'm good at streaming. Hold up. I know how to stream things. Nope, not that. Alright, cool. I highly encourage this method. Just mute the VOD. Doesn't even matter what group it is, doesn't matter what strats they're doing. Just kind of do a loose set of callouts, because callouts help you. If you're doing the callouts, you're then anticipating the mechanics coming up, you're then thinking about it, and then you're prepared to do them. So this is the second 9 lives in M1S. Just pretend to do callouts. So this is me saying, all right, we'll be inside first, then outside. Inside, then outside. This will be inside then outside at 2. Get ready for Proteans. This will be true north. Remember, support's in, DPS out. And I don't know if this is what this group is going to do, but they're doing DPS first. But again, it doesn't matter what that group is particularly doing. Just do it for your own particular strats and group. And we know that this will be Proteans at 2, I believe is the number there. 3, sorry. So you can bring the boss over to E. It'll either be inside, outside at 2, or Proteans at 3. We're doing inside first. Wow, this mechanic takes a lot longer than I thought. Inside first. Then outside. And then we're getting ready for Proteans just south of us. This will be true north. Remember, tank healers are going in first unless they have markers on their head. Get ready for markers. Remember to use the tiles position, not the bosses necessarily. If you don't have a marker, you're baiting first. Next supports go in. Now all the markers are out. And that's the mechanic. That's it. That's all you have to do. It's not going to take you very long. You don't have to do it for all the mechanics, but doing it for some mechanics, especially ones that are a little bit more involved, might involve some memory stuff. Just saying it out loud is, again, reinforcement, and reinforcement is very important. Do I have my other layer here? I do. Finally, as far as quick teaching methods go, think about teaching the mechanic. Oh, you couldn't see the call? It wasn't playing? No, I'm so sorry. I'm actually surprised it didn't play on your side. Theater of the mind, yeah. Just pretend that video was playing. I think it starts at 420. You hit the whoops is M1S clear. But you get the idea. Right. Pretend to teach the mechanic, or actually teach it if someone is asking you, but you don't have to have someone ask you. And there's that saying, like, those who can do and those who cannot teach. It's very dumb. In this at least in this particular case, if you can teach a mechanic, your chances of doing the mechanic are much higher than if you cannot teach a mechanic. So just, for example, we'll use M1S again. How does quadruple swipe work? That's the first mechanic in the fight. Well, she targets the 4 closest players with baits. Depends on your strat, it might depend on your data center. It could be supports first, DPS first, whatever it is. And then a second set of players need to bait proximity cones again. Can't be the same because they have a debuff that will kill them. And I believe most PF is doing same baits, but again, the particular strat doesn't really matter. Say you're doing same baits, so then the next roll goes into the same spots, baits the proximity cones, and then afterwards, everyone goes to the safe spots for the 3rd and 4th hits, because those are clones of the 1st and 2nd hit. That's it. That's all quadruple swipe is. But if you can reasonably walk through the steps and either say them aloud or just kind of think through it, and there's a gap in your knowledge, there's something where like, actually, I don't know how this works, or I don't know what to do here if I get this thing. That's a clear identifier that that's something you can review and study and look up. Finally, clear VODs, I think, are the most engaged you can be as far as studying goes, because effectively, 1 second, I have a cat who really wants to leave this room. Give me 2 seconds. He's been free. Okay. So with clear VODs, and this is how I've studied, especially for like week 1 groups, because there isn't a lot of guide content out yet. So if you're like trying to clear the 3rd fight on the 3rd day or whatever, there isn't necessarily going to be a guide video out. I don't know quite how quickly, say, Hector comes out with videos anymore at this moment, actually. I think I don't know if he's gone faster or slower than before, but basically, it doesn't even matter. There will be clear VODs, though, right? There will be world first groups who, again, if you are the world first group, well, you don't really have much to study on other than your own VODs or other groups who are ahead of you. But if you're not world first, you're just a week 1, there will be a clear VOD from the world first groups. Just put on those VODs, mute them, and watch what they're doing. And this will lead to the greatest engagement because you're not getting any explanations of what's happening. You have to determine how the mechanic is working based off the solutions they've discovered. And often, this can be easy, and oftentimes it can be hard. It just depends on the mechanic. Like if you look at Mauser, for example, in M1S. I'm going to use M1S a lot because it's the first fight of this tier, so it's easy to reference because if you have been raiding this tier, you have probably some experience with it. If you look at Mauser, you can just see that some people are being knocked up in the air and being knocked back, some people aren't. You can start telling the visual cues from the clone, whether it's the left hand and their particular stance of the clone or the right hand, what causes that. There's not a lot there that is not visually intuitive on what's going on. But then you look at something like Pangenesis. That was the last, or it was in the last fight of last expansion. This was P12S. Pangenesis is a debuff-heavy mechanic, and trying to understand that without any explanation can be a little difficult, but it can be done. I did it. It was really hard. It was really annoying. Especially since a lot of the debuff text isn't available to you as a viewer, as a reviewer. If you're actually at Pangenesis, you can like scroll over the text and see it. And sometimes in Garland tools, they'll have debuff text for raid fights, but they don't have them all on patch release. I don't actually know why they have some debuff text and why they don't have others. I don't know if it's just like an update in Garland tools that needs to happen. But regardless, you're not necessarily guaranteed all the debuff text for a given fight, and if it's a debuff-heavy mechanic where what you need to do is dependent on your debuffs, trying to understand what's happening there can be a little rough, but because it's so difficult, in order to understand and learn from it, you're putting in a lot more effort and a lot more work. And so at the end of the day, these different study methods aren't, like, you don't have to do all of them, and it's dependent on your goals and how much time you have, right? So the least amount of time would be just to watch a guide video, take notes, pause it, rewind, rewatch it. Maybe that adds another 5-10 minutes to your video watching time, but it's better than just sitting, hitting play, getting the end, and saying you've studied. If you have the most amount of time, you can watch a VOD video and just like keep it muted and just try to dissect what's happening, write notes to yourself, draw diagrams out of what's happening. And maybe your group expects a lot of raid prep because you're a hardcore group. So maybe you're raiding like 8+ hours a week. So that means that you're going to need to study to keep up with that amount of prog time that you have. So this could mean that you need to spend maybe an hour a week prepping. But if you're raiding for like 4 hours a week, maybe you only need to spend 30 minutes studying because frankly, you're just not going to have that much time in the instance, so you don't need to study and prepare for so much of a fight. And this isn't really about being able to do a mechanic first try without failure. You're going to fail. You're probably going to fail. There are some mechanics that, sure, you can study it, do it first try, great, perfect. But you're probably going to fail, and that's okay. It's not about understanding how to do everything perfectly the first try the moment you get to it, but it's about equipping yourself with the best way to learn from that failure, so that when you fail, you can immediately identify what you did wrong, and the next time that particular pattern happens, the next time you get that debuff, you know, okay, I need to adjust in this particular way, and maybe I still might make a mistake, but I know how to reach the success state. I know what I need to do to get to the success state. My positioning might be a little bit off. I might need to recognize debuffs a little bit quicker, but I know what I'm doing to get there. So if I had to write a thesis for the general statement of this talk, I would say that the next time you think, you might say, I need to see the mechanic before I can understand it. Try aiming for, I'll make mistakes the first few attempts, but I'll understand what I did wrong. Because now that's a positive position to be in. It's not a, I don't know what to do and I'll learn it. It's a, I understand, and it's okay to make mistakes, but I'll get there. I don't know if I have time for questions. If I don't, production can kick me off. Someone message me from AetherCon to tell me that I can't, but if there are questions, go for it. I see someone in Twitch chat right now that says, videos always have so much happening, I can't retain information from them. It's overstimulating and can't focus or sing out any particular thing to know what is important and what's not. That's a good point, and I think a way to deal with that is to diagram stuff out yourself. So just take like a particular mechanic in a video, ignore the rest of the video, just focus on the mechanic, and start sketching things out. Again, it doesn't have to be good diagramming. Just MS Paint it. Just write down, sketch out the important parts and the parts that you need to focus on, especially if you are getting overwhelmed. In general, I would say it's good practice to be aware of every role and how they are interacting with the mechanic. But you don't need to. It's fine to just focus on what you need to do and say, as a DPS or as a support, this is what I'm doing. And just simplify it out, get rid of the extra information coming from a video, try to identify what the mechanic is doing and drawing it. I'm also taking questions from the panel room, if anyone has anything there that is not in Twitch chat and just wants to write something. Open to questions. But yeah, this is just about trying to improve because improving is fun. If I don't have questions, then I think I am at time here. I will double check if I've been kicked off stream yet. I have not been kicked off stream yet. Alright. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope it was useful. I hope it was informative. I want to say again that make mistakes, totally okay. It's just being able to learn from those mistakes, and that's what we're trying to do. How do you keep... Oh, here's a question. How do you keep your emotions under control? A lot of times people immediately panic whenever a new mechanic appears. I think that has to go hand in hand with prepping. The more prepped you are, the less you'll be panicked about something happening. So if you're thinking ahead, especially if you're thinking ahead, that's where the callout type stuff works, because callouts have to think ahead. If you're practicing callouts for mechanic, even if you're not doing the callouts in your actual raid, you're thinking like 5-10 seconds ahead and prepping yourself to do those mechanics coming up. I think the best approach is to use all available info and correlate the different info into something you can easily understand instead of just going with one single thing. Yes, exactly. That's kind of what I was touching on with the multimedia approach, where even if you're only looking at one source of information, supplement it and complement it with your own engagement in that content. Yeah, exactly. Someone says that only visual guide or only VOD or only I need to see the mech to understand it is just one single thing, and you should diversify. And diversifying is great. Yes, anticipate, not react. In general, if you're reacting to things in Final Fantasy raids, you're probably a little bit behind on where you need to go, what you need to do. One of the reasons I say everyone should play caster in Final Fantasy is because thinking about caster positioning means you're always trying to think ahead. It might be a little less important for some casters versus others, but in general, caster positioning is great, and I think generally everyone would improve as a raider if they get a chance to play caster, even if it's not something they normally play. Because it forces you to think about that for improving. Yeah, asking questions, also great. Don't ever just take whatever a guy is saying face value. If it doesn't give you a sufficient answer for why you're doing something and you want to know why, you don't have to know why. I'm not going to say it's terribly important to understand how every little piece of a fight is working. I think it can help I think it's only a boon, but it's not necessary or required. But if you aren't entirely clear on what something's doing, find another resource. Find a text guide. Find another guide, a video, or whatever. I've got more sad cats. I don't know if they're being caught in the mic, but I'm sorry if they are. Hold up, I want to let this cat out too. Okay, cats have been evicted. You did hear the cat? Yeah, I don't know how much my mic is catching their sad meows, but I've let the kitties out. There's actually still one in here. I have too many cats. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. It is having too many cats is its own kind of problem, but I've chosen this. Yeah, thanks for attending. Again, I hope this was helpful and useful, and if nothing else, adds you thinking about your raid prep and why you want to put more effort into it. Because, like I said, it's fun to prog, and improving is fun, and raid prep is part of that process of progging and improving. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great ATACon.